Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Imagineering, where we try and help you move up in the world instead of just on with it. My very special guest today is Andrew Tsuro. He is a Toastmaster. He's a brand ambassador. He's an amazing person, and I am one of very few people who are very lucky to know him. And he gladly gave his time to help me with this Imagineering talks. Now, Andrew is an enthusiastic entrepreneur and he's a pace setting leader who thrives in performance and excellence with a vast amount of experience in behavioral change as well as people development. He currently serves as the chairman of the Toastmasters Leadership Institute Advisory Board, the TLI Advisory Board for short, in Southern Africa. In addition to this, he's the founder of eHub, an entrepreneurs hub platform for team factors and development and all kinds of things. His work credits include mentoring, communication, leadership development, especially programs with General Electric South Africa, Mercedes-Benz. It's like Vodacom, Exarro, SARS, Afrox. It's like just the list goes on, really. And but I know him particularly for his work in Toastmasters. When I believe it was last year, the last Toastmaster here, which is something we can explain later, but where he was the PR manager for District 74. And District 74 is, I think it's 9 countries, is it? 9 or 10 countries? Uh,
9 countries.
9 countries in Southern Africa, and he was basically the head honcho for all the PR movements, and he came up with Proud Toastmaster hashtag, and what was the other one? It was
People making history. You cannot forget that one.
leaders making history. Yeah,
People making
people
history.
making history, and it was so wonderful and amazing that the entire PR system that he put in place was even recognized on an international level. And people commented on that, and it was just so wonderful because we all knew that uh, one of the few people that really do what needs to be done and has a forward-thinking mindset is Andrew. So, with that lengthy introduction out of the way, Andrew, thank you very much for joining me on Imagineering. And you've been well?
Thank you so much. I've been well, and it is quite a lengthy introduction that you prepared there. I wonder who's paying you for that introduction, but let's keep that for outside this conversation. But thank you so much, and I've been well, and I'm so privileged to be a part of this platform, and I hope I will be able to live up to the expectation from that introduction.
Well, this really just you already have really. It's such a magnificent way to get to know people, Toastmasters that is, because it's such a diverse range of people that join these clubs and these organizations. So, how did you start Toastmasters?
I started Toastmasters back in 2015 when having seen Frank, my brother, my elder brother, in action in Toastmasters, participating and so forth. It was more around public speaking, which I started at a very young age myself, outside Toastmasters. And I thought, well, if it's something that I could have done before, I'm sure I can still participate now. So I went on to one of the meetings, and at that meeting, it was weird seeing adults, gray-haired adults, struggling to speak in front of an audience. And I thought, well, for an 18, 19-year-old, the one thing that comes to mind is you just want to show these adults that there's something that you can do better than them. And I think that was my real honest mission when I joined Toastmasters, to show these adults that public speaking is not that difficult. It's a walk in the park. It's something that I can do with my eyes closed, because I found people trembling and struggling to speak, and it was something that came natural. So I thought, let me go into Toastmasters to just show off a little bit, and this showing off has made me possibly learn a lot of things, meet a lot of marvelous people, and today, 4 years down the line, I'm still a part and contingent of this awesome organization.
That's fantastic. I joined the same sort of. I joined because I wanted some place to go or something to do that wasn't work related. and I found such joy. But I also thought that I teach children how to speak in public. It's like I teach them how to write and all these skills as an English teacher. It's like I don't need this really. It's not really what I want. But
Yes.
that arrogance of mine faded quite quickly when I just went through the first 10 speeches of my competent communicator manual way back.
Same here.
It,
It's amazing how there's some form of transformation that comes about when you then work out your way outside the first 10 projects. Because I remember I think it was the third or fourth project, I had to redo it because my evaluator was Frank. And having redone that project, somehow some form of humility set in, and I started learning a whole lot more than what I thought I'd learned in high school or in any other platform when I was learning public speaking. And for that reason, I have continuously learned a lot from Toastmasters and the people that are in this beautiful organization.
that's amazing. Now, you've been part of Toastmasters for 4 years, and I think you've got two DTMs, Distinguished Toastmaster Awards. One in the traditional, or not the legacy system, the system that has been in place for a while, and in the newer system, the pathway system. Uh, and I think that's amazing. I just got my Distinguished Toastmaster Award, and it took me 4 years to get that one. But you just blitzed through it, and I wonder now, and it's a question I ask of every DTM. It's like, why do you stay in Toastmasters? You've reached the pinnacle of award, and I mean, even the head trainer, the TLI trainer and chairman of Toastmasters in District 74. Why do you stay? Well, what's really in it for you after this point?
So I've really believed for a long time that for me, being in Toastmasters was not necessarily about developing my public speaking. Whilst I've learned a whole lot from in terms of the public speaking over the past 4 years, it has never been my reason for staying in Toastmasters. What has kept me going in Toastmasters are the awesome people, the relationships that I've built, personal and professional relationships that I've built that have helped me propel myself from one stage of my life to the next. And most essentially, when it comes to the Distinguished Toastmaster Award, we always relate it to achieving a PhD in communication and leadership. And like I think one of my mentors had put it, I don't think there's any better way of putting it. This skill that we're developing of communication and leadership is not different to rowing upstream. And when you're rowing upstream, the moment you stop, you start going backwards. And for me, this has been something that has been lingering in my mind all the way through, to say the moment I stop, I start moving backwards. And I see this happening in many cases. For example, we've got a timekeeping role in a Toastmasters meeting. The moment I stop getting myself acquainted and relating to that role, the moment I start getting overtime with my presentations, it can be even the moment I stop impromptu speaking, the moment I start losing my train of thoughts easily when I'm asked to speak impromptu, and seeing that I'm involved with things that get myself in terms of the media and the likes, I've got to keep that skill sharp, relevant, and going. And I think for me, even having achieved 10 Distinguished Toastmaster Awards, I would still continue with my journey in Toastmasters, just finding a new challenge and keeping going, because there is never a stop to the learning. So that's why I think I continue going, and I would recommend that anyone who's even achieved the highest accolade in anything continues learning, because the learning never stops.
I love that. And you know what's wonderful is that Toastmasters members, the ones who stay at in the very least, they are such an open and giving people. It's so wonderful. It's really truly amazing. And because it's an international organization, doesn't really matter where you go. The chances are there's a Toastmasters club very near to you.
Yeah. I think part of it is you then realize, when we joined, or like at least when I joined, it was all about me. It was all about me showing off. It was more about me getting into the limelight. But as you continue your journey, you find that, as I was helping someone recently, you find that it's useless being in the limelight all alone. It's useless uh, you seeing all this development, but it does not affect anyone. And as a result, you realize that life is more about serving others. It's more about impacting others. It's more about impacting the next person and giving the next person, because in giving, you then receive the fulfillment, which you wouldn't get necessarily from anything else. And I think for me, that has been the biggest positive impact out of Toastmasters, where people have given into my personal and professional development. It is now my turn to do the same to others. So every opportunity I find to share, give, and do my best, I always try and make sure that I give my best out of it, because I have also received the best in the love, the support, the relationship, and most definitely the mentorship. So it is all about giving out. And again, like you say, it's an international network, and we are building a global multicultural village. And as we continue to build it, we've got to learn a lot more around different cultural experiences, and we've got to use this platform to do that. And that's why I'm a staunch and proud Toastmaster.
That's so nice. I love that. Now I see here on your LinkedIn profile that you joined Toastmasters, then you became the vice president of education. Now, to just put that into perspective for anybody who is watching this who's not part of Toastmasters, the vice president of education is responsible for the educational success and growth of the people in that club. They are second in rank to the president, if you can call it that. But what's interesting to me is that you jumped from VPE to the area director position. Now, the area director is responsible for overseeing 4 to 5 to 7 clubs. So that was that a difficult challenge to do, to jump from educational director to all the way to area director.
So actually, what it does not really say is that I did those roles concurrently.
You did it the same time. Wow.
Yes, yes. Again, I think I attribute it back again to the great support I received in my journey. When I joined in, I was all over the place. I had the time. I did not have an excuse of children, marriage, work, or anything. I was studying, and that I had lots of free spare time because it was my first year. And I took on the role of Vice President of Education because I realized that it is more than just preparing an agenda or program. I always liken the role of the Vice President of Education to the training director of any organization.
Mm.
And it's more than just putting out a training outline for the rest of the year and hoping that somehow someone will go onto the training. It is more about how that training will be delivered, where it will be delivered, who is going to be involved in the delivery process. And the same went on with what was in my interest. I learned a lot from people, but I think I wanted to be the one facilitating that relationship building amongst different people. So someone comes in today and someone joins in or has been around, and this one has certain skills, this one is looking for those certain skills. How about if I put them together and merge them? And that was how I wanted to do it. Now, there is no doubt it was difficult, let alone when you're area director. And your area director, I'm saying you're like an area manager of
Yeah.
different franchises, different branches of franchisees. And in that responsibility, take into account, this is now, I think I was about 20 at that stage, 2021. And as this is happening, I'm in corporate South Africa. I'm looking after big brands like Mercedes-Benz and General Electric. And in that process, they're looking into this young, I wouldn't put it in the context of how it is, but it's a young black Zimbabwean who is coming into corporate South Africa and is giving context. He's just somewhat fresh from high school, but still insists that he's got something to offer. And I'm naturally not a personality of, a bare listener or a bare flowing person who just goes with the water. I always do my homework, and I want to research and make sure that when I get into a meeting, I have to contribute, and my contribution has to be valuable. So it was quite a huge challenge for me to balance out, especially in how corporate South Africa does things. So I had to learn fast, but also I had to also learn how to influence people, not by my words, but by also how people work around. So use the relationships that I have in the different settings to connect and influence the people in corporate, because at the end of the day, people in corporate are like, hey boy, what's in it for me? I need a paycheck at the end of the money. What are you doing to contribute to that? So convincing them that the professional development, the skills they would develop would be essentially useful over and above just taking on the role of the Vice President of Education, where I've got a branch that I'm looking after. It was quite a challenge to juggle them both, but again, I was successful to it because I had quite a lot of support and guidance from the people around, which helped me see through both roles successfully, I would presume.
You know, I don't remember who said it, but someone said that no one gets to where they are alone. You know, we all have to have people that help us. And if you say that you got there by yourself, then it's just such a lonely way, you know. And I love that you recognize that. Look, you were young, like 21. You know, it's like fresh out of high school, coming from a different country, a young black man coming into one of these established brands like Mercedes, and telling them it's like, look, this is the way it's going to happen. That couldn't have been easy.
It wasn't easy. I remember one of the very first meetings I went into, and obviously I didn't go alone because everyone in the Toastmasters leadership context was like, ooh, how are they going to really respond to this? And I remember I put on my suit, my tie, and corporate South Africa doesn't do suits and ties. They do chinos and, swag. And I get into that meeting, and something was being suggested based on the norm of how things were done. Now, again, because I'm not about the norm, I remember I spoke to my division director then, the late Fatima Abrahams, may her soul rest in peace. And I say to her, I'm going into Mercedes-Benz. There's a trend that I'm seeing that I think is un-Toastmaster-like. So I'm going to burst that bubble because I don't want the trend to go on. So I'm going to be a bit assertive in how I approach it. But because I already know that I'm not going to be easily accepted or welcomed into this setting because this is a young boy who knows nothing about corporate, I had to be a bit more firmer than the rest. And I get into this, and they're having a debate. I've tried to be respectful, be a young, respectful person in this meeting. And then I get and towards the end of the meeting, I get to finally find my voice and say, I'm sorry to say, but I understand where you're coming from. I understand what you're saying, but this is the way we are going as a leadership, the present leadership. This is what we require. This is how we will support you. You've got to meet us halfway. So are you going to meet us halfway? And the way I said it, and I'm sure it was borderline disrespectful because I think I was so hell-bent on being them, I had the whole room quiet. And it's alarming when the whole room is eventually quiet and the senior HR person says, all right, we've had you, sir, and they now address you as sir, and we'll get back to you. And I remember so vividly when I got out of that meeting, one of the past leaders there, Rob Douglas, says, "Whew, that was a tough meeting, hey?" And I'm like, yeah, it was, but I'm glad I make sure that we are not misheard or misbranded, because part of the challenge is you've got to make sure that we keep the Toastmasters conduct. We as a nonprofit have a certain way of how we want things done. And that was my key in that meeting. And a month later on, this brand, this beautiful organization called Mercedes-Benz, became one of the best brands I've worked with, because we were able to be very clear with each other without having to question who's the bigger person or who's the bigger organization between the two. And I think for me, it was that experience of learning how to work with it. And through that process, Toastmasters afforded me that opportunity to learn how corporates work. And through the likes of the Mercedes-Benz, the Reserve Banks, the General Electrics of this world, I had the opportunity to understand corporate better. And thanks to that, today I'm a corporate trainer by profession. So it's part and parcel of how things work out and work in Toastmasters and for the transferable skills.
That's brilliant. Now, I think servant leadership, which is a big part of Toastmasters leadership, is really the only valid way to do leadership. And I had a conversation with Lebogang on the way to Pretoria when I was in South Africa for that time for the gala dinner for Toastmasters. And I had this thought that politicians do leadership wrong. They're not leaders, they're politicians. They play the game of politics. They're not really there to be your leader. They're not really there to try and help you. They're there to play the game that is called politics. And sometimes that means by some coincidence or something like that to help you along if it suits their needs. But then I started comparing the structure of politics from mayor to governors to all kinds of things to how a Toastmaster structure works. And I thought to myself, it's like, what we should actually do is take the salaries away from the politicians and say, look, if we want to serve, then serve. And, we'll give you the opportunities for growth. We'll give you all these opportunities, but this is a non-paying position, right? I mean, look, Toastmasters takes up a lot of my time, as I'm sure it does yours, right? But every time I face a challenge, I know I can call on Andrew. I know I can call on Frank. I know I can call on any Toastmaster that has a similar experience and ask, how have you dealt with a similar situation? And I think that's just there's a big lack of that in politics, in the political system that it is.
I think just to highlight, it's a very striking subject. I love such topics because they're very close to my heart, because I believe Africa as a continent is in a drought of leadership. I give an analogy that Cape Town was experiencing a drought not so long ago.
Right.
And with their drought, wasn't it ironic, or isn't it ironic that a city surrounded with two oceans was experiencing a drought? But if you look at it clearly, it is not because they were lacking water. It is the quality of water the Cape Townian people needed that was not available. And similarly, we've got lots and lots of people in Africa, but lots and lots of also leaders in Africa, but the quality of leadership that we need in Africa is scarce. And this is why, if you look at it, some things have to change. The ills in our communities, the societies, whether you call it xenophobia, whether you call it abuse, and in abuse in many forms, it can be gender-based, it can be drug, it can be whatever form of abuse. It is as a result of the lack of leadership. And that leadership comes from learning that it is all about servant leadership. So I couldn't agree with you more. Our political systems need a lot of refining, and we need to bring that back. And part of it could be a scenario where you've got a solution where we need to take the salaries away and focus on the real serving job of a leader. Service. I couldn't agree with you more in that spectrum. I just had to interject and share that it's something that I feel strongly about and share.
But I love your analogy of a drought of leadership. Like I went to South Africa, and the more inland I got, the more to the middle of South Africa I got, the more racist it got, the more uh, the infrastructure was so damaged, the roads were so bad in their condition, and everybody was, it's all a me sort of a mindset. And I said, and and they say to me, it's always been like this. It's like, that's not possible. Even if it has been, then why has it been always like this? Don't just accept things as they are, change it to the way you want it to be, and that comes from leadership. So I hate it when people take up the mantle of leader so easily, and everybody calls them my leader this, my leader that.
I couldn't agree with you more there. Instead of calling each other my leader and pumping all this whatever fancy terms or cars or items, let's just do the service work.
Let's do it. Just do it. Stop. It's not a position. Like Rowan van Dijk, he has this thing that leadership is a responsibility, is not a position. If you want to be a leader, then be the leader. Don't be it because you got a nice salary. Don't be it because you got a nice title or any sort of benefit. Do it because that's what you really, really want to do.
Indeed. I think without a doubt, it's been a huge challenge for many people to realize that leadership is without title. In fact, I was sharing with someone recently that I think titles may tend to affect how we view things as people, as humans, because when you are just friends without boyfriend or girlfriend, your beautiful friendship is a beautiful friendship that is experienced. The moment there's a boyfriend and a girlfriend and titles are invested in that, then things tend to somehow be twisted, or possibly certain expectations tend not to be met. But the same thing in corporate or in any organization, the moment titles come into play, we tend to lose the plot sometimes, or I figure that we are prone to losing the plot more easily. And as a result of that, it's difficult for people to understand that leadership is a responsibility and not just a title. A title is worthless without the responsibility that is entrusted on you. And we've got to start making, for lack of a better word, making the title leadership a sacred term, so that we put value in it, because nowadays it's got no value. Anyone on the street is calling each other my leader, your leader, good leader, for whatever purpose, and we're unable to build that into context. So part of it is that element that we need to build that leadership style that without titles, and make sure that the responsibility is given.
Absolutely. And coming back to Toastmasters, everything we do in Toastmasters has to focus back on the prime directive, which is what benefit is this to the member? And we even have our core values, integrity, respect, service, excellence, all those things. And we have to ask ourselves, do these fit into our core values? Do these benefit the member? And, after that meeting, was it this year, or I think it was earlier this year, when we were sitting in the Tower Echo Hotel, and we did the restructuring of the regions for Toastmasters, and how everybody, all the division directors and the area directors and everybody who was there, was so concerned about how is this going to influence their members. It wasn't like, oh, this is too far for me to travel, or it's like, I don't even like those clubs. It was all about, I think this would be a better way for my members to benefit. It was all about the members. And when I walked out there, I just felt so gratified and overjoyed about the transparency, about the development and the responsibility that Toastmasters have for their members.
Recently, I also shared with someone that, I think we are quite impatient people, because when we start off our organizations or our companies, we want to see the results immediately, now, today, tomorrow, and everything. But if you look at it and think about it, it has taken 95 years for such a vision, which Dr. Ralph C. Smedley had, to come to life to this magnitude, where you have such in 165 countries across the world. You've got selfless servant leaders who are looking out for people who come into this. We call them members, but most of the people who come into this are at a very confusing time in their lives, where they are either forced to come into this organization so that they can improve on their presentation skills to save their work or their job, or some are coming in because they've got a huge fear and they are trusting that the community of people that they're getting into will help them overcome that fear. And there are people behind the scenes. We call them area directors, we call them division directors, we call them coordinators, who we call them the cabinet, who ultimately spend hours and hours on end, sometimes more than what they're paid at their work, to look out for what is the best way to make it effective. And it is in those platforms like the council meeting we had in May, where you are just asking yourself, my goodness, is this how hungry people are to serve others?
Isn't it just amazing?
Why did we realize this and take it, blow it out? It's just mind-boggling and it's amazing how that happens. So I agree with you. It's a unique place to be in Toastmasters. It's a heart-fulfilling place. Even at work, my manager has come to realize that, you know what, we can never compete with Toastmasters. I always say, Toastmasters brings my fulfillment. He says, but it's a fake world. I'm like, it's a fake world that gives you so much fulfillment you wouldn't understand until you're a part of it. And to date, I've never met such an organization where we are fulfilled so much to serve people just as well as people are the key value of our organizations.
But I say exactly the same thing. Everybody wants to start at the back end, where everything's running perfectly. You've made an influence, you've made an impact, and you get everything done. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen that way. We have to start with one step at a time and eventually reach up to the last step, the highest platform. And unfortunately, leadership, it can be a lonely sport. It's not always easy to be the leader, because sometimes, like I said, you come in, you're young and you're from a different country and you look different, you act different, you say different things, but truly that what you want to do is going to be benefiting them ultimately. And sometimes that means you have to act like you are cross, or you have to be more direct or more stern than what you normally would be. And that's unfortunately part of leadership. You don't lead to be liked, you lead for the results.
That's true. Um, I've had my fair share, I think, of that over the past few years, especially in Toastmasters, and it has grown to be a huge challenge. I mean, I was sharing with a few colleagues recently that one of my most toughest leadership learning experiences were the last 6 months of my term as public relations manager, because I also gotten onto this cabinet and the pressure there is blood boiling. The pressure is, you can feel it, you cannot hide it. And again, I was running for a different office, something unorthodox, something unexpected of me. And here I was looking out to say, this is where I want to be a part of, and this is where I want to serve. And as you get to that point, you realize that there are camps, there are opinions. Some opinions just are stronger than yours and stronger than what you feel. And because we're human, we tend to have these things thinking that this is going to crash. And it was one of those challenging experiences where I had to learn to rise above it. You've got to develop a strong sense of emotional intelligence. Otherwise, you would be kicking and pushing everyone who comes in your way because of how intense it can become. But again, if you remember the reason why you're doing something, it will keep you going, because it is what kept me going in the last 6 months of my term, from December 2018 right up to May 2018, when we had the council meeting, the election. It is what kept me going. And I believe strongly that it is also the focus, the why, that has gotten me even into serving into this portfolio without the title that I hoped I would get. It is the why that has kept me going, because that alone is enough a drive, it's enough fuel to keep us going. But it can get very lonely, it can get very difficult, it can get very challenging, both emotionally and emotionally draining, so much so that sometimes you get into some form of depression and you're asking yourself, why the hell am I doing this? It can also drain you financially, and you ask yourself, why the hell am I doing this? But sometimes you find yourself, you're like, I've committed to doing this, let me just do it and get it over and done with. How then you responded is when you see the faces and the transformation of people from a certain point where they were before, right up to where they are at a certain point after your intervention. You will not regret ever sacrificing your emotions, your time, your effort, your finances, because the transformation is just too visible. It's amazing. So it is a lonely sport. It is a challenging and intimidating experience, but it is wide rewarding, and I wouldn't take anything away from it. That's part of the development that everyone has to go through. It is well rewarding, though lonely and challenging.
I think that's a wonderful sentiment to end this conversation off. And if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to this on SoundCloud or Podbean or whatever, drop me a comment and ask Andrew a question, about leadership. And, what's your leadership experience been like? Is your organization in need of a young guy that comes in and dresses differently than everybody else and says, this is how we're going to do things now? Maybe a shakeup is just what we need. And let me know about your views on the political system, and what do you think the fix is for leadership in our politics. With that, thank you, Andrew, for this wonderful talk, and I just really enjoyed it so much. And I think we help people move up in the world instead of just on with it. This has been Imagineering. Thank you, Andrew, and have a good day.
Thank you.